My name is Sarah, and I learned what abandonment truly felt like on a cold October night when I was 14 years old. It's funny how certain memories stay with you, crystal clear when others fade away. That night at the gas station, I can still feel the sting of the wind against my face, still smell the gasoline and corn chips from the convenience store, still see the red taillights of my mother's car disappearing down the highway. "Find your own way home," she had said, her voice ice cold as she slammed the car door. We had been fighting about something so trivial I can barely remember it now, something about my attitude, my grades slipping, me not being the perfect daughter she demanded I be. The fight had escalated on our drive home from my aunt's house, each accusation growing louder until Mom suddenly pulled into a gas station 20 miles from our house. "Get out," she had demanded, her eyes narrowed with that look I had come to fear. I thought she was bluffing. Parents don't just leave their children stranded on the side of the road. That's not something real mothers do. "Mom, come on," I said, thinking this was just another one of her dramatic lessons. I said, "Get out, Sarah. You think you're so grown up? You think you know everything? Then figure it out yourself. Find your own way home." The look in her eyes told me she wasn't joking. I got out of the car, the door barely closed before she sped away, tires screeching against the asphalt. I stood there, backpack clutched to my chest, watching until her taillights were swallowed by the darkness of the highway. That's when the reality hit me. My mother had actually left me, alone, 20 miles from home, with no phone, barely $10 in my pocket, and the sun already setting. The gas station attendant, an older man with kind eyes, noticed me standing there, watching me through the window as minutes turned to an hour. "You okay, kid?" he asked, stepping outside for a smoke break. I nodded, too embarrassed to admit what had happened, too ashamed to say my own mother had abandoned me on the side of the road. "You sure? You've been standing there a while. Is someone coming to get you?" I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down my cheeks, hot and humiliating. "My mom," I whispered, my voice cracking. "She left me here. We had a fight, and she just left." The concern in his eyes shifted to something darker. "She left you here? By yourself? How old are you, sweetheart?" 14. He cursed under his breath, tossing his cigarette to the ground. "Come inside. It's getting cold, and we'll figure this out." The attendant, whose name was Tom, let me use the store phone. I tried calling my mom first, but she didn't answer. I tried our home phone. Nothing. I even tried my aunt's, but no one picked up. It was like the universe was confirming what I already knew. I was alone. Tom called the police, who arrived 30 minutes later. I sat in the back of the patrol car answering their questions through tears while they tried to reach my mother. By the time they tracked her down at home, it was nearly midnight. "She says she was teaching you a lesson," the officer told me, his face grim. "Says you would have called someone eventually." A lesson. That's what abandoning your child on the side of the road was to her. A lesson. They drove me home, the police car pulling into our driveway with lights flashing. My mom stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching as I walked up the path with the officers beside me. There was no relief on her face, no sign she had been worried, just anger and disappointment. "Thank you, officers," she said coolly. "I hope she learned her lesson." The officers exchanged looks but left after making sure I was okay. The moment the door closed behind them, my mother's facade dropped. "How dare you embarrass me like that?" she hissed. "Calling the police? Do you have any idea what people will think?" I stared at her, suddenly seeing her clearly for the first time. This wasn't love. This wasn't normal. This wasn't what mothers did. "Do you have any idea what people will think about you leaving your 14-year-old daughter at a gas station?" I shot back, surprising myself with my own courage. The slap came fast, stinging my cheek. "Go to your room. I don't want to look at you." I went upstairs, locking my door behind me. That night something fundamental changed between us. A thread had been cut, a bond severed. I realized my mother would always put herself first. Her pride, her convenience, her reputation. For the next 4 years, I kept my head down. I studied hard, worked part-time jobs, saved every penny I could. I built my escape plan methodically, knowing that the moment I turned 18, I would be gone. The day after my high school graduation, I moved out. My mother didn't try to stop me. Maybe she was relieved to see me go, or maybe she thought I'd come crawling back within a month. I didn't. I got my own place, put myself through college, built a life separate from her toxicity. We hardly spoke after that. Occasional phone calls on holidays, brief and formal. I'd see her at family gatherings sometimes, where we'd perform the role of mother and daughter for everyone else, a thin veneer of normalcy over our broken relationship. Years passed this way. I built my career, made friends who became the family I chose, even met someone who showed me what real love looked like, all without her. Then, 8 years after I left home, my phone rang with her number on the screen. It was unusual for her to call outside of holidays, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I answered, my voice neutral. "Sarah? It's Mom." Her voice sounded different, strained, desperate. "I know who it is," I replied. "What's wrong?" She burst into tears, loud, messy sobs that caught me off guard. My mother never cried, at least not in front of me. Emotion was weakness in her eyes. "I need your help," she finally managed between sobs. "I'm being evicted. My landlord gave me 30 days notice, but I can't find anything I can afford. The rent has gone up everywhere and my credit isn't good enough, and I don't know what to do." I stayed silent, processing her words. My mother, proud, independent, always right, was asking me for help. "Please, sweetheart, I have nowhere to go. I know we've had our differences, but you're all I have. Could I just stay with you? Just until I find a place. A month, maybe 2 at most." The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had left me stranded at a gas station to find my own way home was now asking me for shelter. Part of me wanted to lash out, to throw her abandonment back in her face, but another part, a part I hadn't realized was still there, ached at the desperation in her voice. "Sarah, are you still there?" I closed my eyes, seeing that 14-year-old girl standing alone in the dark, watching her mother drive away. "Find your own way home, Mom," I said quietly, the words heavy with years of pain. The silence on the other end was deafening. "What?" she finally whispered. "That's what you told me that night at the gas station. Find your own way home." My voice didn't waver. "Now you know how it feels." "That was different," she protested, her voice hardening. "You were being difficult, and I was teaching you." "A lesson, I know, you were teaching me a lesson." I cut her off. "And now life is teaching you one." "Sarah, please, I'm your mother, you can't just leave me with nowhere to go." The desperation in her voice triggered something in me. A flash of that night, standing alone at the gas station, begging the universe for someone to help me. "You're right," I said after a long pause. "I can't do that. Because I'm not you." She exhaled in relief. "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. I knew you'd—" "I'm not finished," I interrupted. "I won't leave you stranded like you left me. But this isn't a free pass, and it's not unconditional." "What do you mean?" "You can stay with me for 30 days. During that time, you'll get counseling. Real counseling, not just one session for show. You'll work on understanding what you did to me, not just that night, but all those years. And you'll respect my boundaries in my home." There was a pause. "And if I don't agree to these conditions, then you'll need to find another solution." I could almost hear her mind working, calculating whether it was worth it, whether her pride could take the hit. "Fine," she said finally. "I agree." "Good. I'll text you my address. You can come tomorrow." I hung up before she could say anything else, before I could change my mind. My hands were shaking as I set down my phone. Part of me felt strong for setting boundaries, but another part felt like that 14-year-old again, desperate for her mother's approval. My boyfriend David found me sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. "Everything okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. I told him about the call, about my mother's situation, about what I'd agreed to. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. "Having her here, after everything?" "No," I admitted, "but I need to do this. Not for her, for me. I need to face this, to show myself I'm not that scared girl anymore." He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "Okay, but remember, you're not alone this time. I'm here." The next day, my mother arrived with 2 suitcases and a box of belongings. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. Her hair, once perfectly dyed and styled, showed gray roots, and lines I hadn't noticed before creased her face. "Thank you for this," she said stiffly as I showed her to the spare room. I nodded, keeping my distance. "Dinner's at 6. I've made an appointment with a therapist for you on Thursday." The first few days were awkward. We moved around each other like strangers, careful and distant. She'd make small talk about the weather, compliment my apartment, ask safe questions about my job. I'd answer politely but briefly, not inviting further conversation. David was my anchor, offering silent support when things got tense. He'd squeeze my hand under the table when my mother made passive-aggressive comments or take over the conversation when he sensed I needed a break. A week into her stay, I came home from work to find her looking at an old photo album I'd forgotten was on the bookshelf. She was crying silently, tracing a finger over a picture of me at my elementary school graduation. "You were always so stubborn," she said, not looking up as I entered the room. "Even as a little girl, so determined to do things your way." I said nothing, hanging my coat by the door. "I thought I was doing the right thing, she continued. "Being strict, teaching you that the world is hard, that you can't always get what you want." She finally looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. My mother was the same with me, tougher even. "That doesn't make it right," I said quietly. She nodded slowly. "I know that now, or I'm starting to anyway. The therapist, she's making me see things differently." I sat across from her, maintaining my distance. "Like what?" "Like how I was repeating patterns, how what I saw as discipline was really—" She struggled with the word abuse. She closed the photo album, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't want to see it. It's easier to believe you're teaching lessons than to admit you're hurting your child." I watched her carefully, searching for the manipulation, the guilt trip that usually followed her moments of vulnerability. But there was something different about her now, a fragility that felt genuine. "That night at the gas station," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking about it a lot, about how scared you must have been." I swallowed hard, memories flooding back. "I was terrified. I told myself you'd be fine, that you'd call someone, figure it out, that it would make you tougher." She looked down at her hands. "But I've been asking myself who I was really punishing. Was it you, for being difficult, or was it me, for not being the mother I thought I should be?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications neither of us was ready to fully explore. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "Not just for that night, but for all of it." She nodded, accepting this without argument. "I understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not yet. I just want you to know that I'm trying to understand what I did, why I did it." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was more acknowledgement than she'd ever given before. The following weeks brought small changes. She started helping around the apartment without being asked. She attended her therapy sessions without complaint, sometimes coming back quiet and contemplative, other times visibly shaken. We had conversations that didn't end in arguments or cold silence. One night, as the end of her 30 days approached, she asked if we could talk. "I've found a place," she said. "It's small, just a studio, but it's within my budget and the landlord approved my application." "That's good," I replied, feeling a complicated mix of relief and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Before I go, I want to say something." She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry for leaving you at that gas station. I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel like you weren't enough, like you were a burden rather than a gift." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you deserved." I sat there, stunned by her words. It was the apology I'd been waiting for all these years, yet now that it was here, I didn't know what to do with it. "Thank you," I finally said, "for saying that. I don't expect it to fix anything," she continued, "but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did wrong." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of pain and misunderstanding between us. "I'm not ready to have a close relationship," I told her honestly. "I don't know if I ever will be, but maybe we can start with something small, coffee once a month, or something." She nodded. tears in her eyes. I'd like that. The day she moved out, I helped her carry her belongings to the car. As she prepared to leave, she turned to me. You know, I've been thinking about what you said that day on the phone. Find your own way home? She smiled sadly. The thing is, I think I've been looking for home my whole life. Running from what happened to me, trying to control everything and everyone around me. But maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's making peace with your past. I didn't say anything, but I squeezed her hand briefly before stepping back. As I watched her drive away, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. There was no victory in seeing her vulnerability, no pleasure in her struggle. Instead, I felt something unexpected, hope. Not for a perfect mother-daughter relationship. That dream had died long ago at a gas station on a cold night. But hope for healing, for both of us to find our own ways home. I don't know what the future holds for us, whether we'll build something new or eventually drift apart again, but I do know this, that 14-year-old girl standing alone at the gas station would be proud of the woman I've become. Not because I got revenge, or because I turned away someone in need, but because when given the chance to repeat the cycle of pain, I chose a different path. And maybe, just maybe, that's what breaking the cycle is all about.